They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my dad or fall, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
Alrighty. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the security rabbit hole to your favorite cybersecurity podcast, the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Folks, I like to bring you people that are interesting, that have big challenges, that have big personalities and big jobs. Today, we're going to do all of those in the same show because we have a guest that every once in a while you run across somebody like, holy cow, that's a big job. And Doug's job is massive. So let me, you guys know the co-host, Mr. Jim Tiller, directly below me. How are you, sir?
Good and well, doing great. Always fun to be here. I can't wait for this one. This is gonna be good.
Yeah, this is a good one. And James and Kat.
Yeah, I put the cat down, but yeah, this is gonna be exciting. I'm looking forward to this.
I love that you named your cat Smushy. That's
He's got a smush face. I'm a big fan of naming the animal of something that it has, right? Like if it only had one eye, he would be Cyclops, right?
That's awesome.
Ooh, that sounds cool.
The way it would be.
We've named ours Lucky because she's lucky to be alive. Found her under a car at a rental place where she was, I think I told you guys a story about 1.5 pounds under like desperate weight. And I said earlier, she's grown on me. And by that, I mean, she's gone from 4.5 to about 13 pounds of cat. So it's a lot of cat. All right. Our guest today, Mr. Doug Cavit. Doug, I could not do your intro justice, short to say that you're the current CISO of Snohomish County. But you've got a history. Introduce yourself, man.
Oh, sure. Well, number one, thanks, Ralph, for having me and for getting on the podcast. I listen religiously, love it, and I recommend it to everyone I run into. That this is you have great stuff. So commercial aside, great stuff. A little bit about me. I'm actually by training a geophysicist, and so I started out doing science. And probably the proudest thing I'm most proud of actually in my career in some ways is that I actually worked on the nuclear test ban treaty. In terms of making sure that we could verify the Russians weren't exploding nuclear weapons that were too large. But anyway, that's my previous life. As part of that, I got involved in doing a lot of, started up a whole support organization for a large enterprise. And what was interesting, I know you guys have had this discussion a lot about, do you come from the top to be a CISO or do you come from the bottom to be a CISO? And the argument I would make is that there is a path from the bottom, but the path from the bottom is being a sales engineer or a support person. The reason being is that you can communicate, and you can communicate with folks in a way that you can understand technical information, and you can create solutions. And that's how you need to communicate to a board, or to your supervisors, or to build consensus in an organization to go do something. And so I think that there's an opportunity for somebody to come up that way through that path that hasn't been discussed, I think, enough around there. But anyway, that's a little aside that I prove I listened to the podcast and to talk about it a little bit about that.
That's awesome. Hey, Doug, you were the CIO of a McAfee when I was a junior in high school. What the heck did McAfee do back then?
Well, a little known fact about McAfee is it actually started out as a dating bulletin board for folks to prove they didn't have HIV. You could make sure that you could have a little card that said I didn't have HIV. And that was the original, way it started. And it was all back in the modem and bulletin boards, and that was how it started out. And then John, was was suddenly going around in his van, getting malware off machines and making money at it. He came up with this idea of shareware. John invented shareware, and he figured out, hey, that bulletin board thing I'm doing for my HIV stuff would be a great place to be able to distribute anti-malware. So there's a direct connection between human viruses and computer viruses in the history of McAfee when it went through that. When I walked in the door as CIO of McAfee, there was 4,800 baud modems. And that was the height of distribution for malware, anti-malware signatures at the time. And we grew that from when I walked in the door to when I walked out the door, that we did, grew it from to, it was, I was employee number 70, went from a little over under 100 million to over $1.2 billion in revenue, took it public, also grew to like 3,000 some odd employees from 70, and did more than 18 acquisitions. And up at that point, the largest acquisition in the Valley was when we put together Network Associates, when we bought out Network General and put together Network Associates. And so that was a wild, that was more than a wild ride. That was, I had dark hair when I started that one, so that was an interesting ride. And then after that, I left and went to Microsoft, and that was to do Windows Live OneCare. And it's because Microsoft wanted somebody who knew how to do anti-malware and to be able to do this. Now, Microsoft's already bought an anti-malware company in Europe, but I brought in a lot of the McAfee anti-malware researchers and stuff with me when I came over to Microsoft. And we, basically went ahead and grew that. And we actually put together a lot. There's a lot of the DNA in Live OneCare that's still there in Azure in terms of, taking and doing deployments in bare metal and cloud. We actually did some patent pending, patent granted work in terms of being able to do deployment and stuff into the cloud for infrastructure and software as a service. And I was talking about ASPs, which was the word at the time back in McAfee's day about being able to do that. Actually, a little known fact: I actually, with working with one of the folks at McAfee, came up with the first virus map. We actually tracked where all the viruses were in the world and came up with that. And so it was the work I did at McAfee to get telemetry. So we were actually one of the first companies to actually getting back telemetry from different applications and then being able to use them and do that. And so that's what got me to be able to go out and brief the CIA and others about, because we actually knew where stuff was coming from and where it was going, long before others did. And I was early on at Akamai. I was actually on the technical board of Akamai because we figured out CDNs very early on. And so when the I Love You virus came through, we were the only company that stayed up because we were able to use the CDN to take that. So it's, you think about it, it was in space between 95 to like 2000, 1999, 2000. You went from 4,800 baud modems to CDNs to distribute anti-malware signatures. That's how fast technology was progressing in that time frame of those 6 years.
That's incredible, Doug. I just text, using our chat here just to text the guys. I had absolutely no idea the insane level of celebrity we have on this show now. Because that is like, you are like OG, like seriously.
Big
That's
time.
awesome. I just learned so many things in the first 6 minutes of the show that I would have never known. It's kind of incredible.
Well, I haven't gotten into the Microsoft years. We did Live OneCare, and I was in essence, I did all the infrastructure for OneCare. So I actually, in essence, did all the servicing for 200 million plus desktops. So I was running a 200 million desktop. We lost Ralph.
The garage door people, the steel door fell right on the modem.
he said it was there's gonna be a bang. We just didn't know it was gonna take out the internet.
Yeah.
There he is.
There you are. Anyway, to avoid a lot of dead air.
I got dropped. Sorry, guys.
Oh, no worries.
I was over here trying to figure out what my internet connection was doing. It's filled with amazing. Okay.
Okay. Anyway, so I was doing 200 million desktops and running that, and so I finished done that. So I looked for another opportunity, and so that's why I switched to my role in trustworthy computing at Microsoft as chief security strategist. So I was there in the early days of Azure. In fact, I put out the first manifesto, I think, one of the cloud about cloud security and doing the cloud security early on in the Cloud Security Alliance early on in terms of working with, I've talked to all of the Fortune 500, literally, in terms of CISOs and, explaining about what we thought in terms of Microsoft and trying to push where, where things need to go, what to prioritize. And I've always been a strong believer in configuration management. I think that's something that's been way too undervalued. I mean, I think we're all buried, we're all like, in CISOs oftentimes are like, new shop teachers are like newly retired guys. There's never a tool they don't like. And they get buried in all these tools when in fact, you really have to take a back to basics approach, and you have to do configuration management well. If you can't do that, tools may slow them down, but you're just creating speed bumps. You're not fixing the problem. And so I've been preaching that, for ages and ages, and that's really critical. So anyway, did that at Microsoft. Left Microsoft in 2013. Did 2 different startups, mostly focused on cloud and trying to do configuration management in the cloud and being able to do it in an automated fashion so that you could basically set up containerization and automation. So as they were early on into Docker and containerization, working across Azure, cloud, not cloud specific, and doing all that work. And then a person retired here, and I got to thinking about it, and I really wanted to. I've been a long time Snohomish County resident, so I wanted to be able to give back to the county because it's done so much, and I got tired of kind of yelling, sitting on my couch and yelling at my TV about things not going right, and decided I need to get in and roll up my sleeves and help. And so in some ways you would argue I'm doing it backwards because you're supposed to join the Peace Corps when you're young, but I would argue that you're better off to do it now because I got a lot more experience to be able to come bring it in and come to bear in terms of trying to do this stuff. So that's a thumbnail. That there's a 10 million stories in between that I could tell to go along with all that, but that's a bit about my biography.
All right, let me start then. Now that we have that colorful backdrop, wow. Again, wow. Talk to me a little bit about what it's like to be the CISO of an entire county. We're not talking like 500 people, rural, small county. Like you mentioned before we hit record, if you were a state, you'd be the 47th largest state. Like, This is no joke. You've got a lot of diversity in terms of ecosystem, population, enterprise. Like, you got a lot going on. Talk to me a little bit about that.
It's a $1.7 billion enterprise is what it is. And if you break it down, I have a police department almost the size of Seattle that has all the unique challenges of a police department. I've got a corrections facility that's like running in essence a care facility for 1,000 people. That is all a corrections facility. I have a medium-sized construction company that's all the public works you think about. That's for 2,200 square mile county. You have a lot of public works, so there's a lot of all the challenges to go with running a construction company. I'm running a to large size legal firm. You think about all the district attorney, all the judicial pieces, all the other things. I have all the things that you would normally associate with a legal firm that I'm running. So plus on top of that, I have all elections, auditing, and all the retail piece. A lot of that is retail because you're dealing with end users and the public in terms of property taxes, in terms of pet licenses, and everything else. You in essence are running everything that's associated with the retail operation as well, in terms of that. And so it's across that whole spectrum. In terms of the county is has got every large Boeing jet is built here, and I also run an airport. Commercial airport. I have a mid-sized commercial airport that's the size of Wichita in terms of flights. Payne Field is actually owned by the county, and Payne Field is where every 777, every 747, every 787 until recently, every 767 is built at Payne Field.
That also include utilities and everything too, outside the airport thing, but like water, electric,
no, those are typically handled through separate utility districts. So I'm not involved in that. I do have I do have critical infrastructure in other ways, but not that. And in some ways, thank God, because I got enough to worry about with the other pieces. But I have my own set of critical infrastructure to worry about. Well, at least I'm not doing that stuff as well. But I consider it's sort of like a GE, basically, is what I have that I'm CISO for in terms of that. And with all the the ups, downs, joys, and other aspects of being in local government, in terms of your board are elected officials, and you have to work with them in terms of getting out budget and stuff like that. So it's a different experience when you're working with folks that have a much more direct attachment to their end users than you would if you had a normal corporate board, which could be a little more insulated from customers.
I'm going to ask a question about structure, and maybe you don't want to answer this one, but you've got, like in a business, these are all separate P&Ls, right? These are all completely separate. Like the airport probably doesn't run the same way as the district courts or your courts there, as the public works, as the libraries and whatnot. Do you have a how do you, okay, Bama's going to ask, how do you stack, how do you build the security org for that? Is it flat? Is it tiered? Is it center of excellence? Like, how do you stack that? Because that's
it's federated. It has to be federated. Okay. You have to have folks that are local in each organization that are there that can sort of adapt, because the access control gates at the airport are a big issue for them, just like they are for corrections. But the other folks, that's a non-issue for them. So you have to have different expertise in these different organizations, and you can't. And so I'm a big believer in setting. I've got to be able to set policy, and I also have to own the network. If I can own the network and I can own the policy, then I can do a lot to affect security and where that goes. But if I don't own, if I don't have those two pieces, it's hard to affect change, because you're always going to get pulled 90 different directions. I mean, I struggle just like any other corporate person does with shadow IT. I struggle like any other person does with all these other issues that that come out there. But the good news is, if you have at least a choke point through the network that you can get visibility to what's going on, then you can at least work with folks to try to get them what their needs are, and meet them where they are, and try to get where you need to be. I mean, as you guys have been preaching, being a Dr. No doesn't get you very far in anything in life, much less security. And so what you need to figure out is, what are the needs of the business? What are you trying to accomplish? And help people understand what they're trying to do. I love telling a story that people used to come to me all the time wanting a database. And I give them a pencil and paper. I say, when you can figure out and explain to me your business process on this pencil and paper, with pencil and paper, then come back and we'll talk about your database. And now get rid of 30% of them. And the other 30% would come back with at least some rudimentary thing. And the other 30% would come back with a detailed plan about what they wanted to do. But that was a great way to help people try to stop and think about, what do I want to really do? As opposed to just saying, oh, no, I won't do that. I don't have budget, or I can't have time, or anything else. Really getting folks to invest in the process. Then gets them invested in the output, and if you get invested in the output, then they'll use it and they'll take care of it. Because if they're not invested in it, it's just it's like anything else in life. You're not invested in it, you don't care.
Honestly, I'm trying to think of. I have so many questions. I don't know how to weed them down to something meaningfully. Your environment is so vast, and there's so much differentiation, to the point Rafa making. And with regards to organization, I'm very curious. Do you approach everything coming from a foundational component, like you said, network and policy, but then how do you deal with the governance around some of these changes and special requirements based on these different groups? I mean, how do you manage all these sort of towers of needs that are going to be
it's a lot of time having conversations. There's a lot of, I spend a lot of time talking to people, and I've got a really great management structure here, which I work with, that it supports security, support what I'm trying to do, and they're also invested in working with these individual different federated units in terms of trying to do what they want to do, and we've invested a lot in education about why security is important and whatnot. And it's easy to convince a sheriff's deputy about why cybersecurity is important. It's harder to get them to do it, but it's easy to convince them it's important. And so so we have some built-in constituencies here that get the fact that you have to be kind of careful. I mean, I live in the world of extremes. It's kind of weird, and this is one of the big contrasts that came to me about public government. In Washington, there's a disclosure law. So basically, all of my emails, all of my are all public records. So everything is either public or it's not. It's either like HIPAA for things for the corrections and everything else, and I also have the health department, medical examiner, all that private stuff. So it's really nice because I don't have to worry about any of this stuff. If that leaks, I don't, it's bad that there's some malware around, but it's not great. I don't have to worry about that, anything that's, changing to my business. I do have to care about this stuff, but this is a much smaller subset of the whole set of data. And so that, an interesting lesson to me is that, there's an old quote I used to use all the time that was from Dean Rusk, who used to be the Secretary of Defense during the 60s. And he said, if you protect diamonds and paper clips with the equal amount of effort, you're going to end up with a lot fewer diamonds and a lot more paper clips. And so the idea here is that basically it's a great way to sort of build in that prioritization about what matters and then put the appropriate resources against what matters, and just not care about stuff that doesn't matter. And think about, think strategically about where you're going to, where you can have leverage and where you're going to make investments to do security.
I'm assuming that's similar, like we have here in Florida, the Sunshine Law.
Yeah.
So basically, like we could put a request in basically for anything.
And the good news is it helps me a little bit on that front. The bad news is that I spend a lot of time worrying about how can I produce records, because we have requirements, legally binding requirements that we have to be able to produce stuff. So I got to go chase down, have processes and machinery in place to be able to produce those records too.
And are there limitations around scrubbing data for certain things? Like if there is,
it goes through a whole office that's set up that redacts things that need to be redacted and things like that. So there is a scrubbing operation that happens, but you have to always think, that's the thing that's interesting. You have to always think about anything I type in an email, anything that I create as a document, I have to be able to, live with it showing up on the front page of the paper. And so you operate a lot differently when you think that way than you would be if you would normally be ranting about this, that, or the other thing, and you vent a lot differently.
I think I'd be in a lot of trouble if if I had to rethink in my past anyway. And sometimes you're like, "God, this is a private email. I can say what I want," and you're like, "Oh no, wait."
Well, and I think Raf, to the point, right? I mean, even work email, you think, yeah, the company can see it if they want to see it, but that's a whole different level of any citizen out there that says, hey, I want to see it. I'm going to put in a request, and then they get it, right? Like, I mean, we always know we're being watched, but who's doing the watching? Are they going to really see it? I think
it's kind of refreshing. I mean, the transparency is really, in terms of like vendor selection stuff, all that transparency is great. I mean, I think it's really good that, you're not worried about that there's some purchasing manager that's doing something weird behind your back, or or has some relationship with somebody, or something, or you're getting pressure from some board member or the CEO because they have somebody they like that they want to do business with, things like that. That doesn't happen because of the transparent processes that are here, which is it's kind of nice. I lived through a lot of all the networking deals that people do, in all my past, lives, and seeing all that go on.
Doug, I'm very curious,
Sure.
do you drive, say, for example, is your strategy, is your approach based on driving a standard, say, to make it simple, a standard platform? Like, I want to make sure everybody's running this, or do you standardize on outcome? I mean, because I'm thinking of all these different verticals that you have, right? And I'm thinking it's like all the different systems and so forth. And you're like, okay, I can't say we're going to use this vulnerability management system, but I want to make sure whatever vulnerability management system we're using does this. I mean, which one of those make up the heavy side of that equation?
I mean, I'm never going to have enough staff or people or resources to do everything I need to do. So I depend heavily on partners. And so when you do that, then that forces you to think really vertically in terms of how you structure things. And I'm not been in the role, a huge amount of time. So this is not, this is previous efforts. So I can't take credit for it, but they've done a good job of standardizing the Microsoft platform here and making it very vertical in that sense. And the one thing that Microsoft has done well traditionally is I get a lot of great visibility into what's happening at the desktop level, and it's all homogenous in terms of what's out there. Now, these gets back into I used to have a lot of arguments with Dan Greer at RSA about culture and Microsoft and stuff. And so this gets back into all those old debates that we had from years gone by. But there is benefits to a monoculture in the sense that I can leverage tooling, I can leverage consistency, I can make stuff that happens and roll out and goes everywhere and does stuff. Does it have its issues? Does it have its faults? 100%. Is it any worse or better than something else? No. Does it? And so it helps to be able to have that consistency, to be able to manage across it and to work with it. And the folks here, and I have because of the procurement process, that does put a damper on the shadow IT. I mean, people will always get to the free stuff, but at least as far as anything that's, large scale, shadow IT, they're not going to do it because they can't go through the purchasing process that somebody isn't aware of it. And so that's where you have an opportunity to influence where folks are going and what they're trying to do. But at the end of the day, I'm like any other business. I have to offer good service. I mean, people have to get a good value for what I'm doing. And if not, then they may be able to find shadow IT to do it better. So, I'm not going to sit in my laurels and declare the problem solved. I'm going to work hard to treat them like I would any other customer.
I think there's an interesting separation there too, Jim, to what you were saying around, standardization, because, you were focused more, I feel like, kind of on the security tooling across all the different areas. And I felt like Doug's answer was really more of like, hey, we've standardized on, Windows, and we've standardized on this, which a lot of people, I think, in security overlook the importance of how can we standardize that we're not running Windows and Mac and, Linux and all these different flavors for these different things. Like, how do we standardize as an org? Because I agree, Doug, like, the more you can have standardized from that aspect, as much as people will complain about a Windows ecosystem, you get so much out of having something like that, that if you start introducing the iPads and the all that other stuff, it just like makes everything so much harder.
Well, what it does for me is I've got a great, that transparency rule works in another way too, is that's a great tool for me to kind of bat down shadow IT, because I can say, well, if I can't capture records, I can't meet the law, so you can't do that. And so that's a great way to help me standardize what I'm doing. And also it gives me a lot of leverage with Microsoft that it wouldn't have otherwise, because I think that sometimes people get so dissolute with your vendors that you don't really have any leverage. And so I'm always a big, there are certain core tools that you need and that are important. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you're running Linux or Macs or whatever. Pick something, worry about how you're doing the configuration, worry about how you're tracking that configuration, worry about how you're doing things like updates and things like that. And then the tooling that goes beyond that is important, but it doesn't alter the foundational pieces that you need. And that's, as I say, getting that, pick one, get it appropriately configured and worry about maintaining that. Because if you don't have, if your state's unknown, then you don't know where your risk is. I can tell you where my risk is. I can tell you where my vulnerability is. And then because I have that information, I have that knowledge at a deep level, then I can apply risk management techniques to say, okay, I care about this one, so I'll worry about this one more than I will this one, and I can take secondary measures on the network, or I can go through and do different kinds of segmentation, or I can actually dig deep and just push updates in a really aggressive way that I wouldn't be able to if I didn't have that ability to have some consistency about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
This reminds me of like the time I spent at General Electric, Doug, where we had one of everything. It was like Noah's Ark. Sometimes we had two of everything. Old stuff, new stuff that wasn't officially released yet, stuff that we were pretty sure had been decommissioned a century ago. We had modems to places. We had dedicated circuits. We had every flavor of operating system, and some I have never heard of again. We had firewalls that were common, and then we had those that I had to literally go find a manual for because I didn't know what the hell it did. But to Jim's point, like having downscoping the complexity, I feel like is the key here, right? The risk the higher the complexity of the organization, the more diversity of technology, the wider the range of things that can possibly go wrong. So the more you can decrease that, you're giving yourself a better chance. Now, again, that sort of flies in the face of like the airport and the hospital don't operate the same way, right? The DMV, for as much as everybody loves the DMV, and this, the county fairground or park or whatever probably don't operate the same way. They don't have the same people and have the same capabilities. So I think, am I correct to say about half? I would say about half of your job is trying to figure out like what's the lowest common denominator that I can implement here that doesn't add any additional risk. Is that part of the game there?
That's part of the game is trying to get to those common denominator. But I think that there's an important element that came in here that I hadn't appreciated as much until I came here, and I give huge credit to the CIO here at the county for implementing this, and that is that they've put in a pretty vigorous technology replacement program. And so basically what happens is every 3 years, he's built into the budget and the thinking and everything else in the organization here that we revisit everything in a 3-year technology cycle, so that and it's not everything. I mean, it's whenever it ages out after 3 years, and then it's replaced. Then you're constantly doing that, so it's for a portion of the infrastructure that's here, and so as a result, we don't have a lot of legacy stuff that hangs around because it gets rotated out with that technology replacement program. And so that's been huge to keep the fact that you don't have a bunch of you could argue XP or something silly running in your organization, because those things have been pushed out. You have newer stuff in there, and so you can always keep your standard and you can apply newer policy to it as it comes through that program. And so it's kind of invisible to the end users, because what's happening is you get a new computer, and the new computer may have stricter policies on it, but you don't know. You're just getting a new computer that does looks nice and does cool things, but it's got that stuff in it. So it's nice to be able to have that continual renewal. I mean, I think that's where people in security get tripped up a lot, and I think that was your podcast today was about protecting old stuff. And I think that's where, if you don't have a program like that where you go through and you kind of keep renewing it, you do get trapped in this case of trying to take care of things like that. And I think that you have to kind of inbuild that into the business, that there's a fixed cost to technology no matter what. And that's for security, that's for infrastructure, that's for machines, that's for all the goo that makes all that go. And that cost is the same year in, year out, and it doesn't, and you can't, there isn't a large knob you can turn there. It's just the tax you pay if you're going to play in a technology game, and you have to pay that. And you can turn the knob and change some things, but if you do too much, then you're going to get sideways, and that's where you get these technology debt issues and everything else, as people go into it with the fact that, oh well, it's just going to cost X, and X is just the acquisition cost. And then we'll never think about it. I mean, my favorite picture that's been used for years and years has been that iceberg picture where you show the iceberg above the water and what's below the water. And so you have to think about every technology acquisition, software, everything has got a technology debt associated with it. And so you have to think, am I willing to pay that debt? And if you are, great, then you have to structurally build that in, for a period of time. And people don't, the time horizon in a lot of companies is like a quarter. The good news here is I have a time horizon that is really is either a year or 2 years that I can think about stuff, as opposed to, our quarterly earnings are coming in, we got to change something to goose the numbers somehow so we can look good. And so we're going to, move your acquisition over here or do something else, or, however, whatever the destinations you go through to make your number.
And it's the same thing we see with like software security. I wish we had cycles like that. I mean, you see places that are still running, wow, COBOL, but like even newer stuff, right? Like people are still running old versions of .NET, because once it's built and running, maybe it goes into maintenance mode, maybe it just goes into, hey, we're good. And it like 10 years go by and you realize, wow, I wish we had been maintaining that over time.
And that's a massive management failure, because someone didn't educate those folks that, at some point you're going to replace that. So if you're buying this, this is not just, again, you're not just buying that car and running into the ground. You're actually leasing it. And it's got a finite lifetime to it, and then you're going to be paying for a new one down the way, and you can't escape that. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to run into these ongoing security issues.
Doug, we're out of time, but I want to ask one more question, because it's been
Sure.
burning my mind since you said it. You said you depend a lot on partners. Tell me what that means. Are you talking internal partners in the business, or do you mean like just service providers, contractors, MSSPs, that kind of thing, or both?
All the above.
All the above. Okay.
I have to depend on the MSSPs to do 7 by 24 because I can never get enough folks to do 7 by 24.
That's fair.
But and I have to depend on my, all these different organizations and all these different people to help me, do stuff and, and to make sure that, to follow policy and to get, do all the things we need to do. And then I have, all my vendors that I work with, and we didn't even get into SBOMs, Raf, which is another, that's something I'm working at. That's another part of my bio I didn't get into with you, was the fact that I worked with CISA on writing SBOM standards for cloud and the cloud infrastructure. And I'm a firm believer in that. And I have some thoughts on that, but I don't want to take up time right now with that one. You can have me back later and we can talk about arm wrestle about SBOMs.
And we will, because I've got an episode coming up on SBOMs. So I'm just keep your calendar, keep an eye on your calendar. I'll be asking you to join that one.
Sure.
Jim, I'll give you the last one because we got to wrap it up. But you go ahead and ask the last question.
Yeah, I'm curious about some of the agencies and groups that are the biggest influencers to you, right? So what's the role of like state and federal government and you mentioned CISA a minute ago. I'm kind of curious, what are the pressures you're dealing with?
Well, CISA actually is a huge partner. There's a lot of things that, as much as anyone else complain about in the federal government, but CISA has actually been a huge partner in terms of helping, state and local governments. They do, I get free penetration tests from them. I get a lot of support in terms of different things they do and stuff that they provide. And it's a huge, and it's a big benefit, especially if you're thinking about, smaller cities and other organizations that don't really have any kind of security expertise. CISA has been huge in helping them. So I heap a lot of praise in them. They're a good partner. At a state level, we actually, Washington State's been very progressive. Ralph Johnson's been a great CISO for the state, and he's actually putting together a state SOC. And so we have information sharing, and we operate where we can actually report in stuff to the state SOC, and then that information gets disseminated, and there's a way for us to be able to, for smaller communities, that's sort of a lifeline on a 7 by 24 basis to be able to have that state level SOC to work with. And there's a lot of state things we have to integrate with, if you think about it, in terms of, different databases and things that we have to work with. And so that's been helpful for us there.
All right. Well, Doug, we're out of time, but I thank you so much for joining the podcast. This has been absolutely fantastic. I know I speak for the guys when I say my brain is full. I need a minute. I need a minute to process all that. We're gonna have you back. There's probably a lot to discuss here. And that in terms of building an organization, in terms of how to partner properly, in terms of how to execute SBOM. We'll have you back for. So there's a lot going on. But I want to thank you for joining us and giving us a bit of your time. And yeah, it has been a pleasure.
Thank you, gentlemen. My pleasure completely. Thank you. All
right, James, thank you for riding co-host here as my connection failed for a moment there, but I think AT&T is back to stable, and the good news is we'll fix it in post. Anyway, folks, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find Doug on LinkedIn. And you can, when this gets posted, I'll tag him and you can ask him questions. You can offer him support or advice or whatever, or get a hold of him and really pick his brain about the good old days that we all remember back when 2400 baud modems and Michelangelo virus were our biggest concerns. Anyway, thanks for listening. I think that's the music. We're queued. We're out of here. Thanks for being with us.